Welcome to another episode of Fringe. Today, we're talking to John Bolloten about his recent book and other work about Georgia. So, John, would you like to kind of tell us your story? How did you get to where you are today?
Yeah, well, I'm a documentary photographer based in Bradford in the north of England. Actually, I came late to photography. I didn't even pick up a camera till I was almost 44. So I've been a bit of a quick learner and built up quite a catalogue quite quickly, I suppose, even though all of my work is pretty much long form sort of storytelling. I kind of made a kind of bit of a name for myself, my work with injecting drug users and homeless people, which started to be published from 2017. And that was 5 years of work in total from 2014 to 2019. Since then, I've photographed extensively in like the northern grime music scene and a bit of drill of that scene, as well as like local projects on like grassroots football and cricket. But since then, I did a book about cockfighting in Manila in the Philippines, and last year I released a book about an outdoor cannabis farm, which was photographed over 1 year. And the latest one, Tbilisi Raw, was only made very recently and just came out literally last week, which was documenting a group of football ultras in the Georgian capital.
It really is a fantastic catalogue of work, and I truly recommend anyone listening to really go deep through your Instagram because it's so many incredible confronting photos there.
Thank you.
So we're talking about Georgia today and kind of the Georgian skinhead hooligan movement. So we'll start off. How would you explain Georgia to someone that's never been?
I would say that Georgia is a relatively newly independent country of around 30 years since the collapse of the Soviet Union. And since that time, it's been relatively unstable. You know, the Caucasus region is regarded as one of the most unstable regions of the world. But if you go there, you go to Tbilisi, it's a really nice city and, you know, by and large, friendly people and everything, and it doesn't feel unstable.
Hmm.
But since the collapse of the Soviet Union, of course, there was a civil war. There was also a war with Russia, who are the neighbor to the north. And Georgia also lost two parts of its territory, Abkhazia and South Ossetia. And since the war in Ukraine, you can see a lot of anti-Russian feeling, anti-Russian graffiti across the city, but particularly around the city center. So, you know, it's been very pronounced. But, you know, if you don't speak Georgian and you don't speak Russian, you don't really pick up on a lot of things. You know, people are talking, you're not really understanding. But when I was there in March, there was these big demonstrations of what they called the Russian law, and I'm making some inverted commas because it's exactly the same law that exists in America about funding of NGOs. That's a whole other issue. But I went down one of the evenings and got tear gassed. So that was pretty unpleasant, really. But some of the ultras, they were down there participating as well.
I think Georgia's an absolutely incredible
So that's
country.
Georgia.
I've been 4 times and I love it
Oh,
there.
great.
I think Tbilisi is an incredible city.
I like it. I'd spent a week in Yerevan in Armenia, and it's a very beautiful city. But as a photographer, I didn't find it very interesting, even though I did go with the ultras of Punic Yerevan to a match, and I
Oh,
was in
wow.
their sector and everything, and that was great, and they were very
Mm,
kind. And then I took the bus to Tbilisi, and it
mm,
was like a different world. The architecture is different, the atmosphere is different, the whole vibe is different. There's
mm.
graffiti everywhere. I mean, it's the kind of thing that I like. It reminded me of like just coming in to Bradford from I don't know, Ilkley or somewhere, you know. So I liked it as soon as I got there.
Mm. That's one thing I always say to anyone that's asked what I've thought about Georgia is it's got such an incredibly noticeable atmosphere. Like when you get there, you know you are there, and that's quite hard to explain.
I found it quite similar to Belgrade.
Mm.
Can't really explain it. I thought it was very similar to Belgrade, and I spoke to one of the leaders of the ultras there, and Serbians aren't regarded as the best of friends with Georgians, and they were really
Mm.
surprised. But I said I felt the kind of ambience, the atmosphere was very very similar,
Yeah.
to Belgrade, whereas like Georgia and Armenia to me were very different,
Mm.
very 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 different.
I think I'd have to agree. I think Belgrade and Tbilisi move at very similar paces. I think they've got
Yeah,
a similar outlook on how a day should be approached.
and I think the architecture is very similar. I mean, I've been
Mm.
to many cities with these like panelaks, these big like Soviet style apartment blocks, and Novi Belgrade, New Belgrade is like incredible. And Tbilisi is the same with these big blocks. I've
Mm.
been to other cities with the big blocks, but it seems like Belgrade, Tbilisi, they have a similar atmosphere.
Mm.
It's kind of hard to describe, really. You'd have to kind of be there and then and somebody else might have a different perception anyway.
Mm. Definitely. I think it depends on the time of year you go there as well. I think the atmosphere changes quite a lot with the weather.
Yeah, and for me as a like documentary photographer, a sense of place is really important. I'm really interested in the environment. So, places like big blocks and things like that, they appeal to me. These they have an atmosphere all of their own, and I like that. For me, it's not just about the foreground in a photo or whatever.
Mm.
The whole photo, the background, the environment is critical.
Mm. So let's get into Georgian skinheads. So can you provide a little overview of what it means to be a Georgian skinhead?
Well, I only know a few. So if you don't mind, let's go back a few steps.
Mm.
Because when I went to Tbilisi in October, I didn't know one person there. So my introduction to the work that I was doing was I saw that Dinamo had a game on, a cup game, when I was there, I think 2 days later after I arrived. So I thought, okay, I will go to the game. And then I looked to see online if they had an ultras group, because I thought that might be a cool thing to photograph. And I thought maybe I could go into a match with them, take some pictures, and that will be it, really. So I contacted them, and I was very surprised to receive a reply at first. And then I had a conversation with one of the guys. It's Elita, they're called Elita Dinamo Tbilisi. This is the ultras group. They're the only real ultras group in Tbilisi, and the most important ultras group in all of Georgia, and probably the most important one in the whole Caucasus. I would imagine, even though they're not that big in size. And they looked at my Instagram, I had a lot more pictures on my Instagram at that time. And I think they just had a feeling about me. And then they said, why didn't you come and meet us? So I met them, and then I went into their sector. So it's quite interesting there. They control a sector 17. They have the keys for it. Nobody can go in there. No foreigners can go in there. No tourists can go in there. No journalists and no photographers. So I found that I was the first one in there, and there was about 100 of these guys, and some of them were skinheads, and some of them weren't skinheads.
Mm.
Some of them were like casuals, some of them were just guys, and it was very intimidating. I'm actually not intimidating to me, because when I got there, I didn't know what to expect, but actually everybody was very friendly and everything. And then I went in the sector with them, and within 2 minutes, they'd identified two Russian guys in the stadium. They said, "Who are you? Where are you from?" And they said, "We're from Russia." And the Elita guy said, fuck Russia. Russian guy give a middle finger. And these guys came out of the sector like in a split second, like it's caged off, right? But they just got over these cages. And the Russian guys ran off, they ran after them, and then they beat them in the stadium. So I'd been in there 2 minutes and I saw this and I thought, well, okay, this is heavy. This is heavy.
That is certainly an introduction.
Then the 2 or 3 guys came back and they looked at me and they were like smiling and they said, did you get any pictures? And actually, I just shoot with a wide angle lens. It was too far away. It was 50 meters or something away. The picture is useless. I said, no, listen, I'm shooting with a wide angle lens. I'm just working close up with people and everything. They said, oh, okay, no problem. And that was that really. And then, the game went on. Everything was kind of fine. And then I noticed some of the guys, they took off their T-shirts. And then I could see some like neo-Nazi tattoos. Because I didn't know anything about Elita, So I thought, oh, okay, definitely some of these guys are far right. But everything's okay. I didn't feel in any danger or anything. I took a lot of pictures. And then it kind of got even more crazy as the evening went on because, the game finished. And one of the guys, the main guy who I'm in touch with, and I'm like talking to him every day, the game finished. He said, what are you doing now? It was like 9:30 at night or something dark. And I said, oh, I don't have any plan. He said, do you want to come with us? I thought, yeah, okay, why not? Maybe I'll get some pictures. We jump in this car, and apparently there was about 4 or 5 cars. At that time, I was just in one car, and we were just flying through the streets of Tbilisi, going further and further away from the center. And then I was sat in the back seat. There was 4 guys, 4 like ultras in the car. And then it just dawned on me, or I had this thought like, these guys are just going to take me somewhere and just like kick the shit out of me or worse, And then I thought, no, don't be stupid. If they wanted to do that, they would have just done that already. Just relax, everything's cool. So I said to the guy, I said, where are we going? He said, we're going to go and do an ambush on these other ultras from Torpedo. So they dropped me off and I hung around. And a few minutes later, these guys just came. Well, they came down the road, but what it was, there was like a wide pavement and then like some bushes or trees. And then there was the road. The road was quite wide. So they came around on the road side. So they weren't really visible. And then suddenly they just charged through these trees and they just started beating these guys. So there was about 25, 30 Torpedo and about 15 Elita. And it was just like being in a movie. And so I was there and I thought, okay, I'll get my camera out. And it was like dark, but I just fired off some pictures. The whole thing lasted maybe a minute. There was about 3 definite big fights that happened. And then the next thing, all the Elita guys just ran off into some hood. They went around these shops and they ran off into this hood. And I thought, well, I can't run off. And if I run off now, I'm going to get like kicked in. So I just got my phone out, went on like Google Maps, found where my apartment was, clicked directions. It said, take the 309 bus to the metro. This is in the Barkatili district. And I knew how to navigate the metro. And I looked over the road, the 309 bus was there. I walked over and I went on the bus and I was out. So this was my introduction, my baptism of fire into like Georgian hooliganism. And while I was on the bus, I got a WhatsApp from the main contact of mine, just saying, where are you? And I just replied, don't worry about me. I'm out of there. I'm on my way back to my apartment. Talk to you later. And that was the thing that got me in with these guys, because Elita are notoriously hostile. They're very, very aggressive. They like violence. They're proper serious ultras. They're all right wing. And but I earned their respect. And that was the beginning of my relationship really with not just the ultras, but also the skinheads, who part of them make up Elita, and then
Mm.
when I went back in March, I met some other skinheads as well. It's a bit of a long answer, but that's how it all kind of that's
it's,
how it came together.
it's a fascinating kind of. It really is being thrown into the deep end.
It
Incredible.
was the only time in my life as a photographer that I've ever felt completely invisible. The whole time this went on, I'm certain nobody even saw me or looked at me.
Mm.
And then I got out of there. So I definitely had some kind of higher protection that day. But actually, when I came back to the UK and I thought, could I go back there to make a book with these guys? And then kind of decompressing and running through everything through my head, you kind of have a PTSD going on. I mean, I've had PTSD from like other photography projects, just really heavy stuff. So you have to like work it through your head. And even now, I'm like, even though the book is out now and the work was finished in March, I'm still working it through my head. So it's like a form of PTSD. You just have to like work it through, and then it's all good.
Mm.
But it's like it was heavy. It was very, very heavy.
Definitely. And so you say it was quite they're notorious for not really speaking to journalists. So how did the conversation go when you tried to go back and do the book?
Well, what happened was that when I got back to my apartment that night, there was there was a couple of guys who were skinheads, and they were teenagers. They were only 16, but one of them had like neo-Nazi tattoos, and they took my Instagram, and then I arranged to meet them the following day. So I actually spent the whole afternoon hanging out with these four teenagers, and when I met them, I realized they were all neo-Nazi boys, but they were fine with me and everything. And I spent 3-4 hours with them. We took some kind of formal pictures, and then we went down to some like disused railway tracks. And after a while, they kind of weren't paying me much attention at times, and I was just shooting like candid pictures, just the dynamics between them and the friendship, and it was really good. But then I got ill. I got ill that night, and then the last 2 days were wasted, and then I had to come back. But the main guy who I was dealing with from Elita, I was speaking to him every single day when I got back through WhatsApp. So we just formed this relationship then, and it was very productive. It was very positive. I learned a lot about him and them, and he was keeping me updated on what they were doing. I was getting like videos from matches and finding out certain actions that were taking place. And after like 3 or 4 weeks, I thought maybe I can go back and make a book, and I suggested it. And by then, the relationship was really, really good. So they said, "Yeah, come." So the season ended in December, starts again the last weekend of February. So I went the first weekend in March and worked on that pretty solidly for 10 days. They set up a lot of things for me so I could maximize my time there, travel with them to a couple of games, went to their private gatherings, and then one of the guys who's like one of the senior guys in the ultras, he's a very prominent neo-Nazi figure in Georgia. So he'd asked me like, "Can you come and photograph me and my boys this week while you're here?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." That was the only time really I was a bit like worried, because I was going off to like a forest somewhere, and I knew there was going to be people there that didn't know me. Obviously, all the Elita boys, they knew me, they see me at at games.
Mm.
Um, but actually, it was fine. Everybody was very welcoming and very accommodating to all the requests I had for pictures, and they were like training in the forest, fighting training, and I was just photographing. I had like total access. I mean, it was incredible,
Mm.
really. So basically, there was like you have Elita, which is the umbrella group, which is made of smaller factions like Brigada, uh, um, and like Fronty, and then some sort of non-aligned boys, and then you have some like proper neo-Nazis. So some of those neo-Nazis are part of Elita, and some of Elita are part of them, but some of them aren't either way. So there's a connection, but you couldn't really necessarily say that, well, Elita are a neo-Nazi ultras movement, but they are right-wing, shall we put it? Yeah. If we're going to start splitting hairs or whatever, yeah.
So, in some of your observations through this, what do you think some of the underlying factors are that kind of contributed to the rise of these groups?
So going back to what we were talking originally about the instability of Georgia, I mean, these guys, they're very nationalist. They love Georgia, and I found them very similar to like the nationalists you would have in the UK in like the late 70s, early 80s, and that whole skinhead movement and that whole football hooligan movement. They're very much modeled on that, and they would often be asking me, "Oh, what was it like in those days?" And everything. And they saw that as like the peak hooliganism and peak like street level fascist neo-Nazi movement, as well as other ones from different countries, obviously Germany and Italy in particular. And then this massive hatred of Russia, and there's actually a 3-page interview in the book with Elita, and they just say Russians are our enemy. We don't care even if they're like far right or nationalist people. If we find Russians, we're going to beat them. If they're with their like girlfriends or wives, then they're probably safe, but we're gonna beat them. But also they have the same opinion by and large with like immigrants. So you go to Tbilisi, you can find Indian restaurants, you see black people and Asian people, whatever there. But it's not particularly safe, I would say, for immigrant people in Tbilisi. Even though people can come there, have a few days, you may end up being in the wrong place at the wrong time. And some of these guys, I mean, fortunately, when I was there was no action against civilians. That's something I cannot condone. I don't want to be part of. I don't want really anything to do with any of that. If it's ultras against ultras, I don't have any problem with that. That's what people sign up for. But I know there's they talk about it candidly in the interview, like about attacking immigrants in Tbilisi and things like that, So it was surreal because I was treated, I was totally accepted, totally trusted. This whole work was based on trust. Everybody was very kind to me, very warm, very, very accommodating. But on the other side, politically, I don't share those views, but I just try to be a very honest documenter. So my philosophy is listen more and talk less. I don't think there's, you can read articles about, neo-Nazis in Georgia. It seems to be having increasing popularity, but I wasn't part of anything that was wider in the time I was there. I got sent videos from people going to see a neo-Nazi band, and I was actually invited to something after I'd come back, like a gathering and everything. But I could only do what I could while I was there, of course. But you find just walking through Tbilisi anti-Russian graffiti all over the place. So there's definitely a sizable grassroots feeling, not definitely against Russia, and probably on a smaller scale against immigrants. People who are not like pure Georgian inverted commas or white inverted commas.
Because I guess it's also important to state that for anyone that doesn't know, how many Russians have actually come into Georgia since the start of the Ukraine invasion.
That's right, and that was very sizable, and people were complaining that the cost of apartments had gone up and so on. For me, when I was there in October, well, that was a much higher level than when I went in March, because I think many had gone back by then. If you're just walking around Tbilisi, if somebody's speaking Georgian or Russian, if you're not familiar with those languages, you're not paying any attention. Like if two people walk past you and they were talking Armenian or, whatever they speak in Azerbaijan, you wouldn't even pick up any difference, Of course, if you're there, you would pick it up. And of course, some people who are foreigners, who are tourists, may go there who have some Russian. So they may face a hostile reception by just going into shops maybe and asking to buy some bread and coffee or something. But they're speaking in Russian, which is obviously widely spoken there.
Yeah, it certainly does happen. I've been mistaken for being Russian several times, being there, especially the ginger beard. I've been accused of being Chechen a few times, and I'm sat there like, promise, promise I'm not. The Modern Insurgent is completely independent. If you want to support our work and help boost independent journalism, please consider supporting us via Patreon at patreon.com/moderninsurgent. Thank you very much. So how do these groups impact the local communities?
I think up until a few years ago, probably more than now, because Elita were involved in some far-right demonstrations in Tbilisi, and that resulted in a lot of pressure from the police. So they've kind of backed off on that. And also, even though they have a strong relationship with the club were fined €50,000 a few years ago because of a banner that Elita had at a European match at that time. So most of these guys who are part of Elita, they're living out in these hoods like Varkatili or the airport district or Africa district, these districts near the airport, Isani on that side. I don't think really there's much impact. I mean, they're young guys. They're all between 16 and 23. They're all very closely connected, but the ultras movement is still quite small in Georgia, and football attendances are also small. Especially at Dinamo, where the stadium holds 55,000 people, and it's hardly anybody there. I think things will change if the ultras really marginal at best, unless they're going to do some Cortio or something, on the way to a game. So if they get some European opposition or something, then they're more able to do more dramatic things visually in the center. I mean, when they go into away games, they're well known. The police and the authorities are stopping the bus, making sure they're going to arrive late or not let them out the stadium, to try to stop any potential trouble, because these guys are ready at a moment's notice to start fighting.
So that you touched on how the Georgian police kind of react to the Georgian hooligans, especially for away games. Is that same kind of narrative stuck to by the Georgian authorities? Do they kind of always look to crack down on these groups?
That's my understanding. Certainly, it's still an issue, violence at football, because a month or so ago, somebody went too close to the Elita sector. A young guy went too close to the Elita sector, and there was some abuse and everything, and then he was beaten. If you imagine the terraces, and then you've got a concourse that's private with no cameras. He was beaten up there, and the report from that was aired on Georgian television. So it was obviously a big deal, and they had contacted Elita for some comment or whatever, and they ignored. They weren't interested in responding to the media. So I'm certain that the authorities are aware and don't want those things to happen. But it's kind of localized because there's not actually that many people at matches. you know. And I noticed when I was there, when those two Russian guys got beat up, the security just stood there and watched it. You know, they didn't intervene or anything. But certainly, I think if there's European opposition, like I think 12th of July, Dinamo will be drawn 2 legs against Astana from Kazakhstan, first qualifying round of Champions League. If they win that, they will play Dinamo Zagreb. So I think I would imagine the authorities will be quite alert in case there's any potential for trouble. But what I understand is Elita are not interested to be fighting against Astana. So I think they only have certain perceived enemies. But it might be different with different teams within Georgia. And they've tried to have fights with different ultras groups from different domestic clubs over the last months, and none of them have taken place. So I think it's without doubt that Elita are seen as the most feared group of ultras that exist in the country, without any doubt at all. You know, if you were there and you saw them, you wouldn't want to get tangled up with them.
Yeah, they certainly seem like very committed, scary ultras.
Yeah, and you know, they want to make a name for themselves. And in the interview in my book, they say we don't even care to be the biggest ultras group in Georgia. We want to be the biggest in the region. You know, and also they say that you only show your power at away games, and they've got quite a strong contingent who will go to matches away. They say it doesn't mean anything at home. It's away games where you show your power, especially if you go to an away game and, you know, there's an altercation. I mean, a few years ago, Dinamo were playing Torpedo in Kutaisi, and I've got the footage on my phone, and there's literally like 40 guys from like Elita or whoever it was then. I think it was Elita actually, fighting, I don't know, hundreds from Torpedo and fighting them off, you know. And they were really proud, like, you know, but they're not scared at all. Beitar Jerusalem, they came to Tbilisi. The Elita guys found out where they were, 15 against 40, and they charged the Jerusalem guys, and the Jerusalem guys ran off. You know, so numbers is not an issue. These guys, they're fearless.
Certainly not people that I'd want to cross on a dark Tbilisi street, to be honest.
That's right.
So I also want to touch more on kind of the wider neo-Nazi stance. Obviously they're not one of the same, but there's certainly quite strong links between the two. Why is there quite a strong neo-Nazi movement in Georgia?
I think the nationalist Georgians, they look back to this original Georgian republic that was established, I think, in 1921. You know, and before I think Georgia was fully incorporated into the Soviet Union. They see this as that's the model for the country that they want. And in fact, when I went to meet these skinheads in the forest and photograph them, they pulled out this actual flag. You know, when I saw them pulling this flag out, I thought it was going to be some like neo-Nazi flag. I didn't know what it was. And they were holding it up. I said, "What is it?" And they said, "Oh, the First Georgian Republic or something." But yeah, they would model themselves on all those previous regimes that have existed of similar ilk, you know, with a very strong anti-immigration policy. And I've seen people posting on Instagram, you know, completely pure neo-Nazi stuff. So they're well versed in it. You know, they're well educated in it. You know, when I went that time in the forest, I was talking to one guy who was very pleasant to me, and he was saying, you know, how much he loved Oswald Mosley. So they're well versed in their politics. I don't share any of that, of course, but they would want to see a movement in Georgia, and there is a wider movement. You know, you can see videos on YouTube. There is a wider fascist movement But you know, a lot of times people are covering their faces. You couldn't tell, like, are these people with these people. You know, some of the allegiances and alliances might be quite loose as well, and maybe there's differences between the groups. I mean, it's hard for me just being there for just shooting for 12 days. And the guy that I'm mainly in touch with, who's one of the leaders of Elita, he's not one of these Nazis. You know, he's not part of that group. So he's telling me some stuff, and I'm learning about it, but it's not coming from like the actual horse's mouth. And actually, when I was there, I wasn't really engaging with them on that deeper level.
Yeah.
You know, because I'm concerned about other things. I'm concerned about taking pictures. I'm concerned about my safety, and just having this kind of workable, trusting relationship without getting into like more finer details. You know, somebody might say to me, "Oh, how can you go and work with these people? You know, why aren't you challenging them or something?" And if I went to Georgia and challenged these people, I'd be in hospital or worse. That's not my job. My job is to show something that's real, that's authentic. And of course, no photographer has ever made a photo book inside a football ultras group ever. It's the first one, you know, and then this kind of running side by side with it, with a definite crossover, was this access into this neo-Nazi group, you know. So of course you can't get access into that. So my concerns is to have a productive relationship where I'm able to take these very honest, authentic pictures, because I don't really want to get into a discussion around this or that. And if they're talking to me, I'm more listening than anything else.
Yeah, 100%. I spent time in or with some neo-Nazi ultras in Sofia at a Suska game, and the idea of challenging them, their beliefs kind of in their territory, is one of the dumbest ideas I could kind of think of in that situation. Like there's a time and a place for ideological debates, and being in an ultras stand is not one of those places.
Exactly. You know, one guy who bought my book, he messaged me, I think, a couple of days ago, and he was like, "Oh yeah, amazing pictures, incredible and stuff." And then he said, and he said, I was like really taken aback by the pictures, and then I realized like you were actually there taking the pictures, you know. And I think sometimes people forget that, like, somebody is there taking risks to make this work, and people might have their own ideas sat at home about how all this works, but you know, this was the most dangerous piece of work I've ever done. On paper, probably impossible. Obviously, not impossible because I went there and I did it. I'm not a fighting guy, you know. People on the margins of society, they respect people who are just real. They don't need to be like them. If you try to be like them, then they see through it in a flash, you know. But if you're just real and they see you're real, and then if you can build up trust, then great, something may happen. But most people, I think, on the outside, they have no real idea of what it must be like on the inside doing this work, or even being around people like that, because most people are living in their own bubble in whatever way in life. You know, they're not really even a lot of the time interacting with people who have different points of view. I mean, we saw that with like Brexit, you know, when that vote happened, and it was like, oh, how did that happen? You know, well, like 50% of the population feel very different to how you do. That's how it happened. But you don't know that because you're not actually interacting or engaging with people who are different than you. And I would like to think, like, being in Tbilisi and making this work, that maybe I've opened up a slightly different world that exists. You know, when I've been talking to them, my main guy there through WhatsApp, you know, I'm just explaining like, well, in the UK, we're all just kind of getting on. You know, people are used to being with different races of people, and the kids are growing up together. It's all right, you know, and things. So just to give, yeah, there are different ways, and there's also ways and means, and the right time to talk about these things, of course.
So That kind of leads me on to an interesting question there. What are some of the like common like misconceptions about the work you do?
Sometimes it will like people you have these like often these intense debates within photographic community about like if you're working with people who are like poor or marginalized or vulnerable, then the photographer must be somehow guilty of exploitation, just looking to make their own name at of the expense of other people and this power imbalance and everything. But all the work I do is consensual. I worked with many injecting drug users in Bradford, many of them very, very vulnerable people. And all that work was based on trust. And I think people bring all kinds of baggage into the photography world, particularly from where they're coming from. If you're coming from more wealthy, affluent backgrounds, you're probably not even being around people on the margins or living on estates or whatever. So people have loads of like misconceptions. And one thing that like I kind of recognize as a photographer is like you've really got to have a lot of empathy and compassion for people. And like working with these guys in Georgia, I kind of realized that probably for most people, empathy and compassion, they might think they have it, but is it limited or does it extend to all human beings? Is there like a red line where it's like, no, there are people who don't deserve our compassion?
There's
I think
certainly a
it's
lot of
different if you're
people I
dealing.
think that
Yeah,
become judgmental rather than empathetic in these more
yeah,
extreme situations.
yeah. And so I just like I try and listen, and I try and show people that like I'm trustworthy, and I've obviously got some kind of way that it does work. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to do some of these very sketchy projects and everything. But it's all different. Every scene is different. Every person is different. Every group is different. But like most people, they might express views or fairly strong views about any of it, but they don't really know any of it. They don't know. People are quick to judge. People are quick to make statements about other people or quick to demonize people. I mean, yeah, these guys are far right. Most people are not going to want to deal with people like that. I understand and I accept that. Obviously, we have racial discrimination laws and so on and so forth. However, there are groups of people on the margins of society who are worthy of being documented. They're part of our existence. And for many, many young men, regardless of the politics, violence is a way of life.
Mm.
I work for a bare knuckle pit fighting club as a photographer. I'm working with a couple of other ring bare knuckle clubs. So I'm around a lot of fighting guys. Violence is for them is normal, and I think if two people can go and have a scrap and sort out their differences, then that's definitely better than somebody getting stabbed.
Yeah.
So violence isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it is part of life. And the other thing as well is like with these guys, they like love each other unconditionally, like people do in the military. And there's something about young men or men being able to do that, you know.
Especially
Yeah,
in
it's quite
today's day and age where there are so many young men that specifically miss that.
exactly. And also, these other ideas that now exist in society, like the LGBTQ plus whatever, in Georgia, these guys, they're totally against that. And a lot of people are who like recognize like the importance of family units and everything. So without getting into all of that, because it's obviously a massive minefield, it's something and your life getting meaning from that. And then the other point I'd like to make as well is like, even though these guys might have views that probably most people would regard as fairly abhorrent in terms of racism, for me, I try to think, well, I'm not going to let that define them for like ever.
Mm.
People change, people learn in life. and many people change. So just because somebody had certain views at 16 or 20, it doesn't mean they're always going to be like that. You have to be exposed to other factors, other people for you, and also to grow up, to have a wider, hopefully more balanced perspective on people and life.
So, like, how does the Georgian public kind of look to these groups? Obviously, we can look at them from like a Western perspective. How does the Georgian public kind of line up with?
I couldn't really tell you because I didn't really have any conversations with any other Georgians,
Hmm.
apart from like people who were like renting me apartments. And one family who rented me an apartment, their son is playing for what they call a locomotive, one of the other teams in Tbilisi. And they don't have a like ultras movement. But I sat with him for a few hours one day and said I was working with Elita and stuff. He said, "Oh, these guys are crazy and everything," you know. So I don't know what the wider public thinks. I think a lot of the time the wider public is not really that interested in football in terms of the ultra stuff at the moment. People are trying to survive and it's a bit unstable there still. And in terms of far right, I don't think there's a lot that's really tangible. But sometimes you can watch videos, where people are going out, what do you think of this? What do you think of Russians here? And you can get some kind of idea what people think. But I think there's definite splits between like pro West slash NATO slash EU and pro Russia, pro Eastern looking. I don't think that's going to be resolved kind of anytime soon.
It certainly is
Country
a
like
bit of a
Georgia is such
minefield.
it's a minefield. And I think Georgia is complex. There's different internal and external forces, and all these places which are kind of like on the border. Like Ukraine is on the border between say east and west in inverted commas. Turkey's on the border. Georgia's on the border. All these places are going to have like conflict of one way or another. I think in the decades to come. I don't think that's to be avoided. And I think the more unstable Georgian society may end up becoming, then I think there's more of a danger then that people will look to more extreme views. That's what happens when societies break down, isn't it? People go to more extreme potential solutions. So I think there's a definite risk there. I think, in places where people's living standards rise and everything and their life is more stable, they go towards a more middle ground. I think also, I mean, they're obviously like far right is far right, but I think there's a massive now blurring of left and right, traditional left and right. It's a massive blurring of it now, particularly in the last 15 years or so, from like the conflicts in the Arab world, particularly like Syria, Libya, through to like Ukraine and stuff. So a lot of things are just not clear cut anymore. But things on the far left or the far right, they don't really change so much, do they, compared to like the traditional left through the middle to the right, which changes a lot actually, or currently is changing.
It's certainly become a bit of a mishmash of a spectrum. And so, my final question is a little bit of a two-parter. Do you think, say, Elita and then the wider Nazi movement in Georgia are dangerous? And if so, what can be done?
They are dangerous. Most of the time, they're looking for ultras or other football groups to fight with. Sometimes it's fighting out of hatred, and sometimes it's fighting out of culture. Because when Feyenoord went to Tbilisi, they had I think a 2-on-2 or a 4-on-4. When Maribor from Slovenia were there, they had an organized fight. So they want to have fights. They love fighting, and that kind of ultras on ultras violence doesn't affect your average person. It's kind of harmless in that way. It's not like the so-called glory days of British hooliganism when you go to a game and you wonder whether you're going to get out alive because you could be a target. Hooliganism's not really like that so much anymore. But I think like with Elita, of course it's dangerous because like they see like Russian people as an enemy. So that could be dangerous, for any Russian. And I think there's a danger of like people who are immigrants in Tbilisi. Although by and large, Georgian people are welcoming. I mean, quite a few tourists. I mean, it's not really a tourist place by and large, not like Spain or Paris or whatever, but it has quite significant tourism. So quite a lot of foreigners are coming in and spending a few days, and they're enjoying it, and they're probably thinking this is really good. So it's not that prevalent at the moment, but I think there's always a risk depending on how stable society is and what's going on there. But I think that's the same like everywhere. I mean, like somewhere like France, it's a lot more pronounced, isn't it? In Italy, but maybe other European countries as well. But Georgia, not really at this moment.
Yeah, I definitely think it's somewhere where tourism is going to increase. So it might even be a situation where interactions might start to be seen, which would be a shame because it's a country that I absolutely adore. So I hope there isn't any kind of strife in that sense.
Great. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on today, John. If people want to find your book, where can they get it?
Yeah, you can find me on johnbolloten.co.uk, JOHNBOLLOTEN. But I think if you just put in something like documentary photographer Bradford, or I would probably come up. Or you can find me on Instagram as well. So
Yeah.
that's my main that's my obviously my website is there. Then Instagram is the main kind of platform I'm using, but Instagram doesn't like me anymore, so I'm kind of permanently shadow banned and banned from doing this and banned from doing that, and nobody can see my stuff unless they follow me, and if they follow me, they probably still can't see it unless they're interacting. So all those tricks that social media companies do, which is ridiculous, really, because there's people out there like me. We're trying to make work on the margins of society. It may be uncomfortable viewing, but it's real, it's authentic, and it's just becoming harder and harder to get our work seen. I'm not a guy looking for fame. I'm trying to make work that I think has value, and it's just becoming harder and harder to get that seen. And places like Instagram were quite democratic platforms once, but now like the algorithm's just gone out of control, and you can't. There's no human being there running the show. You can't talk like you and me and like maybe have a conversation that has got a bit of nuance in it, or something. Or it's like, no, I'm not promoting violence. I'm not promoting drugs. I'm not promoting any politics. I'm just showing work that I'm making.
Mm.
I'm not really a photojournalist or anything like that. I'm not rude, but Instagram doesn't understand that because like the robot who's making all the decisions has been programmed to like cover like the widest possible field of potential violations. And then once you get caught up in that, then it's a real problem to get yourself back out of it. So it's a real struggle, actually. So anybody who can go and buy a book of mine or a print or something, it's always very welcome. It does help me try to carry on making this work.
Yeah. We face really similar problems at the Modern Insurgent in regards to Instagram, posting like a lot about different insurgencies or terrorist groups. There's a lot that gets you banned, so you have to be very careful. So I implore everyone to go and
I mean, if you're putting
John.
out content that's pure pro-Ukraine, you're going to have a free pass. If you come up with anything that's an alternative point of view, they can't accept it. And there's different narratives of every conflict that exists in the world. And the global South has a very different view to what the kind of global West has, and people in the global West, they kind of feel like, oh, but it's like this, and the whole world thinks that, and it's not like that. But it's harder and harder to show alternatives, or even just to accept that people have different views, and people have long memories as well.
Mm.
They have long memories if their countries have been unstable for long periods of time. Same as the Georgians do. They have long memories. In the interview with Elita, they say Russia's been our enemy for hundreds of years. So, whatever's happened in the history, that's just keeps building up in the psyche. But I think often us, like here in the UK and other Western countries, we have short memories. We forgot what the government was saying like 6 months ago about this or that. I think people need to just try and think a bit more and look at what different people are saying, at least, to try and form a more informed, balanced opinion, or something that resembles maybe something closer to what the real truth is, which may
Definitely.
or may not be black and white at all.
Discussion and education. I really do think they are the two key points that everyone, if we just focused on a little bit more, the world would be a bit of a brighter place. So
Definitely.
hopefully that's the nice ending point we can.
Yeah, the more people can talk together, the less likely they are probably to start fighting. It's not really rocket science, but it's not that easy. It seems to be becoming more difficult, unfortunately.
Yeah,
but if you want to fight, go to Tbilisi, go in the stadium, and go next to the sector, and then you can have your fight.
And I'm sure they'll be happy to give you one. Okay. So thank you very much, John, and goodbye.